we are witnessing one of the most surprising discoveries in recent biblical archaeology. Deep beneath the soil, where silence and time had buried all traces of the past, something remarkable has come to light. In the Galilee region of Israel, not in Rome or in a book, but in the very land where the gospel story unfolded, researchers have uncovered the ruins of a large Byzantine church. The site stretches across more than 1.5 dunams, and what they found inside could change the way we understand Christian history. Hidden under centuries of mud was a Greek inscription, perfectly preserved in an ancient mosaic. At first glance, it may seem like just another relic from the past. But this message is powerful. It names the Apostle Peter not only as a follower of Jesus, but as the leader of all the apostles, the one who held the keys to heaven. This isn't just a piece of history. It's a spiritual statement set in stone, possibly pointing to a truth that could reshape one of the oldest and most debated questions in Christian theology. And yet, surprisingly, very few people are talking about it. But they should, because this discovery changes everything. Every now and then, something is found that doesn't just teach us about the past, it challenges us to rethink what we thought we knew. That's exactly what's happening here. For over 100 years, scholars, theologians, and faithful pilgrims have searched for the true location of a place named in the New Testament, a village called Bethsaida. This town is mentioned several times in Scripture and is known as the hometown of 3 apostles, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. The Gospel of John says it clearly. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. But where exactly was Bethsaida? That question has puzzled experts for generations. Many theories have been proposed, but none confirmed. Until now, on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, close to the waters where Jesus once walked, a team of archaeologists led by Professor Mordechai Aviam and Dr. Stephen Notley made a groundbreaking find. Beneath layers of earth and time, they uncovered the ruins of a Byzantine church that had been buried for over 1,400 years. But what they found inside wasn't just important for archaeologists, it was deeply meaningful for the Christian faith. At the very center of the church's ancient mosaic floor, something remarkable was found. An inscription written in Greek that speaks directly about Peter. But this was not a simple mention of his name. The text calls him the chief of the apostles and the one who holds the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This is no ordinary phrase. It closely echoes the powerful words of Jesus in Matthew 16:19. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. What makes this discovery even more astonishing is not just the message itself, but the condition it was found in. The mosaic is so perfectly preserved that it looks almost new. The lines are clean, the letters sharp, the colors still vivid. It seems as if time itself left it untouched, as if it was meant to remain hidden until just the right moment. It feels like a message from the past, sealed and protected by divine providence, waiting to speak to the modern world. Scholars and experts are both amazed and deeply moved. Dr. Craig Evans, a well-known scholar on the life of Jesus, has called it one of the strongest archaeological clues ever found that may link directly to Peter's home. Dr. Stephen Notley, who co-leads the team that uncovered the site, said, "It's not just about the mosaic. It's what it confirms, the church, the village, the people. Everything is lining up now." But to fully understand why this find matters so much, we have to look at the mystery surrounding the town of Bethsaida, a puzzle that has challenged historians and theologians for generations. Bethsaida, which means house of the fishermen in Aramaic, was once a lively fishing village on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. According to the Gospels, it was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. It was also the setting for several important moments in Jesus' ministry. It was here that Jesus gave sight to a blind man as described in Mark 8:22. It was near here that he fed thousands of people with only a few loaves and fish, according to Luke 9:10-17. And it was in these waters that Jesus is said to have walked on the sea. Yet despite all these miracles, Bethsaida is also known for something more troubling. It is one of the few places Jesus publicly condemned. In the Gospel of Matthew, he says, "Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago." After that, the town disappears from the pages of the Bible and eventually from history. As time passed, the exact location of Bethsaida became a mystery. Pilgrims in the Middle Ages tried to find it, relying only on old stories and religious tradition. But there was never full agreement. The earth had hidden the town, along with a vital piece of the Gospel's geography. In the 1800s, German and American explorers suggested that a mound called Etel, located nearly 2 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee, might be Bethsaida. But the theory had problems. For one, the location seemed too far from the water to match the descriptions in Scripture. More importantly, the site didn't contain enough evidence from the Roman period, the time when Jesus lived, to fully confirm the connection. For a town known for its fishermen, the earlier suggested location of Bethsaida didn't quite add up. It was just too far from the Sea of Galilee. But that all started to change after the 1967 Six-Day War, when the region became more open to exploration. Israeli archaeologists began to turn their attention to a different site, El Araj, a low, marshy area much closer to the shoreline. Early surveys found broken pieces of pottery, glass, and ancient mosaics scattered across the ground, hinting that this area had been lived in for many centuries. The real spotlight came in the early 2000s. When Pope John Paul flew over the region on a pastoral visit, he was welcomed by the excavation team and presented with a replica of a bronze key that had been found at the site. This wasn't just a gift, it was a powerful symbol. The key pointed back to the words of Jesus in Matthew 16 and the authority given to Peter, the apostle who would be known as the one holding the keys to the kingdom of heaven. By 2016, a major archaeological effort was launched at El Araj, with support from institutions like the University of Nebraska at Omaha. During their very first digging season, the team found strong evidence that this area had been active during the Roman era, including tools and coins dating all the way back to the 1st century, the time of Jesus. By 2018, things became even more exciting. The team had uncovered the foundation walls of a Byzantine basilica. Alongside it, they discovered parts of a public bath, several guest rooms, and what seemed to be a large public gathering place. Then came the most stunning find of all, the inscriptions. One of the Greek inscriptions, set in a beautifully patterned mosaic border, offered a prayer for someone named Constantine, likely a local benefactor, not the emperor. But it was the rest of the text that stood out. It named Peter clearly and directly, calling him chief of the apostles and holder of the keys to the heavenly realms. This bold language matched the exact kind of description that early Christians often used to describe Peter's special role. Even more fascinating, these details align closely with the writings of an 8th century bishop named Willibald. He had visited the Holy Land and wrote about spending a night in a church dedicated to Peter and Andrew in the town of Bethsaida. For many years, his story was dismissed as just pious imagination. But now, it seems that the church he mentioned may have actually been found. What was once considered legend is now supported by stone and scripture. The church is real. The names are clearly written. The theology is unmistakable, and the faith of the early believers is etched into the very floor. Beneath layers of soil, floods, and silence, the church had been resting for centuries. It waited, hidden under the landscape of Galilee, while kingdoms rose and fell, while wars were fought, and while generations forgot where it stood. But in 2016, that silence was broken. When archaeologists began digging at El Araj, they had only a few clues. But soon, the ground started giving up its secrets. They found more than just old stones. They uncovered a layered history of worship. The remains of the Byzantine church sat atop even older Roman structures, forming a vertical line through time. It was a place where people had gathered for prayer and community across different eras. And this wasn't just a single church building. It was part of a larger complex, with a bathhouse and what seemed to be a kind of ancient hostel, exactly the kind of setup you would expect in a place that welcomed both locals and travelers seeking spiritual rest. This site wasn't just important for the local community. It was a place visited by early Christian pilgrims. And it's here, on the mosaic floor of the church, that the written word reappeared in a powerful way. 3 different inscriptions in ancient Greek were discovered, each placed carefully within the design of the floor. 2 were damaged over time, but one remained almost completely intact. And in just a few lines, it carries centuries of belief and theological meaning. Set inside a graceful circular border made from small, colorful stones, the inscription reads, "The entire floor of the diaconicon was paved with mosaic by the devotion of Constantine, servant of Christ, for the chief of the apostles and keeper of the keys to the heavenly realms. Saint Peter, intercede for him and his children." This isn't symbolic poetry. It's direct, theological language. It doesn't simply call Peter a disciple or follower. It names him chief of the apostles, suggesting leadership, not just participation. It also refers to him as the holder of the keys, a phrase clearly reflecting Jesus' words in Matthew 16:19. This language also connects to Isaiah 22:22, where keys represent a royal role, one of succession and spiritual authority. These words weren't chosen by accident. They show what early Byzantine Christians believed, not only about Peter's role in the church, but also about the importance of this specific place. Even more remarkable is how well this inscription lines up with the writings of a man named Willibald, a bishop from Bavaria who traveled through the Holy Land in the year 725 AD. Willibald wrote about staying overnight in a church at Bethsaida that was dedicated to Peter and Andrew. He described it as being near the water, with spaces for guests and an atmosphere of deep reverence. For years, scholars dismissed his account as overly emotional or exaggerated. But now, with the discovery of the church, its design, and even the dedication stone, all matching his description, his words carry new weight. What once seemed like a pilgrim's tale may now be seen as a reliable witness from the past. The church beneath the earth preserved more than stones and symbols. It preserved memory. It held onto belief. And in doing so, it gives us something incredibly rare in biblical archaeology, a direct connection between the written testimonies of early Christians and the physical remains of what they described. But this leads to a deeper question. Now that the site has been identified, what does it tell us? Why does this matter so much? It's one thing to find an ancient church. It's something far more significant to find that the church was built over the ruins of a first-century village, a village that fits both the geography and the stories of the Gospels. A village that may be the very hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. This isn't just a coincidence or a hopeful guess. This is a rare case of historical continuity, a sacred memory, not just written in scripture, but carved into stone, built into walls, and passed down through the shared memory of the early church. The church at El Araj was likely built in the 5th or 6th century. But it wasn't placed there randomly. Early Christians were intentional. They built churches on places they believed were holy, on locations that had meaning. They didn't have satellite maps or modern tools. What they had was tradition, stories passed down from one generation to the next. and a spiritual awareness of where important events had taken place. We see this same pattern across the Holy Land. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem marks the place believed to be the birthplace of Jesus. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem stands over the site where many believe he died and rose again. The Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth commemorates the moment when Mary heard the angel's message. These sites weren't chosen randomly. They were built by those who remembered. Now, perhaps Bethsaida, long debated, often forgotten, has returned to the conversation. And it does so with the same markers of sacred memory: physical remains, matching testimony, and a strong connection to the early Christian community. The people who built the church at El Araj didn't need archaeology to tell them where to go. They had something else: living memory. They had heard the stories from their ancestors. They trusted in the nearness of what had once happened. And because of that trust, they built where the memory of Peter and his hometown had not yet been lost. The discoveries at El Araj offer more than just theories. They reveal the daily life of a real village from the 1st century. Archaeologists found coins, tools, pottery, and the remains of buildings, all showing that this was once a busy fishing town. This wasn't just a possible match to the biblical town of Bethsaida. It was a place where families lived, where stories began, and where some of Jesus' closest followers may have walked. And rising above this ancient village stood a church, not just any church, but one dedicated to Peter, the very apostle to whom Jesus once said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." That fact alone would make the site remarkable. But what makes it even more powerful is the message written on the church's floor. The inscription doesn't just call Peter a holy man or an apostle. It refers to him as the chief of the apostles. That title isn't simply a compliment. It carries deep theological meaning. The Greek word used, korypheos, is not vague. It clearly points to leadership. It signals that Peter held a unique position among the 12, not by coincidence, but by divine choice. It declares that Peter wasn't just part of the group, he was the one set apart as their leader. And here's something even more important. This bold statement about Peter's role wasn't written in Latin. It didn't come from Rome. It wasn't the result of a medieval debate or a papal decree. It was written in Greek by Eastern Christians, long before the East-West split in the church. This inscription was laid into the floor of the church by believers who lived much closer in time and place to the apostles themselves. This matters because it shows that the belief in Peter's leadership wasn't something created later by the Roman Church. It was already part of Christian faith and worship in both the Eastern and Western traditions back when the church was still united. And perhaps the most striking part of all is the second title given to Peter in the inscription: holder of the keys to the heavenly kingdom. That phrase is not a metaphor or poetic flourish. It is a direct reference to Matthew 16:19, the same verse that has become one of the pillars of Catholic teaching about the authority given to Peter by Jesus. For centuries, one moment in the Gospels has stood out as a turning point: the moment when Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." That one verse has carried enormous weight. It's been quoted at church councils, debated during the Reformation, and carefully taught in catechisms. And now, incredibly, it has been found carved into stone in the land where Peter lived, by believers who lived many generations before those theological arguments ever began. This discovery doesn't answer every question, but it does answer something important. It confirms that Peter's special role wasn't a later invention. It was recognized, respected, and spoken aloud by early Christians, long before there were clear divisions between East and West. In the very place where Peter cast his nets and followed Jesus, he was remembered not simply as one of the 12, but as the one chosen to lead, the man with the keys, the one entrusted with something unique. For nearly 2,000 years, Peter's role has been at the heart of Christian identity and Christian disagreement. Some have pointed to Matthew 18:18, where Jesus gives authority to all the apostles, suggesting that Peter was simply one among many, not above them. And it's true. All the apostles were given the power to bind and loose. But there's one key difference: only Peter was given the keys. That detail matters more than it may seem. In ancient cultures, keys were powerful symbols. They represented responsibility, trust, and exclusive access. The person who held the king's keys wasn't just opening doors, he was acting on the king's behalf. To hold the keys was to share in royal authority, especially when the king was not present. This idea goes back even further, all the way to the Old Testament. In Isaiah 22:22, God says of Eliakim, "I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens no one can shut, and what he shuts no one can open." Christians have long seen this passage as a prophecy pointing to Jesus and to the one who would carry his authority on earth. That same pattern appears in Matthew 16, when Jesus speaks to Peter. And now, the archaeological evidence at El Araj makes that link even stronger. Because here we have early Byzantine Christians, centuries before the medieval papacy, honoring Peter as the one who held those heavenly keys. This belief didn't come out of Rome centuries later. It was already present. It was already honored. And it was quite literally set in stone. This doesn't prove everything. It doesn't mean every modern claim about the papacy is confirmed. It doesn't demand that someone become Catholic. But it does something powerful. It roots the Catholic view of Peter, not in politics, but in history. It shows that this belief has deep, ancient roots. That even in Peter's own homeland, among early Christians who spoke Greek and lived far from Rome, he was seen as the one chosen to lead. For those who aren't Catholic, this discovery isn't an attack, but it is an invitation. An invitation to pause and think. Can a belief this old, this widespread, and this clearly remembered be so easily dismissed? Or does it ask us to look again with fresh eyes at how the early church understood leadership, unity, and the man they called the keeper of the keys? This discovery speaks not only about Peter himself, but also about something deeper: the meaning of leadership, spiritual authority, and unity in the church. It doesn't demand a specific conclusion, but it does raise a question that cannot be ignored. What started as a simple dig along the shores of the Sea of Galilee has turned into something far more meaningful. It has become a meeting point between faith, history, and scripture brought together in stone. The mosaic found at El Araj isn't just an ancient flaw. It's a voice from the past, clear, strong, and preserved through the centuries. Against all odds, its message survived. A testimony not only to Peter's name, but to his role, his authority, and how the earliest Christians understood him. This isn't only about where something happened. It's about why it mattered and still matters. The significance of this find goes beyond archaeology. It touches on the continuity of belief. From one generation to the next, through empires and changing languages, this truth was passed on. That Peter wasn't just another disciple, but the one entrusted with something greater. And now, that memory has been confirmed not by theory or tradition alone, but by the soil of Galilee itself. In a world where many question the reliability of sacred tradition, this small inscription has become a quiet explosion. It reminds us that the early church remembered more than we often give it credit for, and that it preserved those memories in ways we are only now beginning to uncover. One person who read the discovery simply said, "This is the most important thing I've come across since the moon landing." Because in that moment, something incredible happened. The past didn't just speak, it revealed itself. And now the question is not, did this happen? The question is, what will we do with what we now know? Because something remarkable has emerged. Faith and history have collided, and the echo of that collision is still unfolding.